All right, so as Israel is still in the midst of that ongoing International Court of Justice case that was brought by South Africa saying they are in violation of the Genocide Convention, the United States under Joe Biden is doing everything that we possibly can in order to protect Israel in their genocidal campaign, economically, militarily, diplomatically, including this most recent escalation, where Joe Biden decided it would be a good idea to go and conduct strikes on the Yemeni Houthis. So here from The Spectator, breaking, U.S. President Biden says in regarding Yemeni airstrikes, "I will not hesitate to direct further measures to protect our people and the free flow of international commerce as necessary." So essentially what this is one of the wealthiest countries, or the wealthiest country on the face of the planet, choosing to bomb one of the poorest countries on the face of the planet in order to protect, number one, as he points out here, international commerce and trade ships, and number two, a country that is doing a genocide with our weapons and with our tax dollars and with our support. That's what's happening. Joe Biden is choosing to spark off a war with the Houthis rather than just applying mild pressure on Israel to stop slaughtering innocent Palestinian men, women, and children. That's the dynamic here. And so to get a little bit more in terms of like a visualization here for you guys, right? So here's Yemen, all right? And then here you have the Red Sea, and up here is where you have the Suez Canal in Egypt that goes on and, into the European markets. And so a lot of ships come from India and from Southeast Asia and China, and they come around here and they go through the Gulf of Aden and they travel up the Red Sea, and then that gives them access to these European markets. Now you'll notice down here between Djibouti and between the southwest tip of Yemen, that's a very narrow strait here. And so ships having to pass through there, if they are subjected to Yemeni attacks or a Yemeni blockade by the Houthis, they're going to have a difficult time. And not only have the Houthis been, obviously conducting these attacks on shipping vessels, where as far as I've been aware, there hasn't been a single death associated with those attacks on the shipping vessels so far. But basically imposing this semi-blockade, a tangential outcome of that is that the insurance rates for these shipping vessels who would travel through the Red Sea have absolutely skyrocketed, meaning that now this has basically been largely shut down. It's costing billions of dollars in damage to Israel's economy, the global economy broadly. You have a bunch of ships that are now having to be diverted, and they come all the way down here under the southern tip of Africa and around the west coast of Africa, etc., etc. And so it's a pretty big deal. Now, I mean, the Houthis are doing this because they want the genocide in Gaza to stop. It's as simple as that, right? When there was a temporary pause in the fighting a couple of weeks ago, the attacks on the shipping vessels stopped. They've openly said when there is a ceasefire, the attacks will stop. So the simplest solution to this issue of stopping these Red Sea attacks is, to get a ceasefire in Gaza. It's really not that complicated. But instead of doing that, we're risking a broader escalation of a massive war sparking off in the region, because we have the Houthis down here in Yemen. We also have a risk of a broader escalation with the, Hezbollah group up here in Lebanon, as well as the country that backs both of those groups, Iran, and as well as elements in Iraq and Syria as well that are backed by Iran. So I mean, all of this is as tense as it could possibly get, and it's an absolutely unmitigated disaster, all because, as pointed out here by Owen Jones, the West and the United States, because the UK was also involved in this and several other countries as well, they're coming out and they're admitting that they care more about shipping lanes and the flow of commerce than they care about actual human beings, innocent men, women, and children inside of Gaza. That's their priority. We also have an interesting element here in terms of whether or not this is even legal for Joe Biden to be doing this. As pointed out here by the only Palestinian American representative in the House of Representatives, Rashida Tlaib, POTUS is violating Article 1 of the Constitution by carrying out airstrikes in Yemen without congressional approval. The American people are tired of endless war. We also had here from Ro Khanna, the president's strikes in Yemen are unconstitutional. For over a month, and this is important, he consulted an international coalition to plan them, but never came to Congress to seek authorization as required by Article 1 of the Constitution. They're both completely correct here. The president does not have the authority to just go do airstrikes wherever they want, right? Or to go and get us into a hot war with the Houthis. That is not a presidential authority. And we can go to the War Powers Resolution here in just a second, but I also wanted to point out this Joe Biden tweet from just a couple of years ago, right, when he was running for re-election, or running for his first election. Let's be clear, Donald Trump does not have the authority to take us into war with Iran without congressional approval. A president should never take this nation to war without the informed consent of the American people. Did he get your consent, my consent, the consent of our government or our elected representatives? No, he did not. So, it's just brazen hypocrisy there from Joe Biden. Now, there have been some people who have made the argument that the War Powers Resolution from, I believe, 1973 gives him the authorization to conduct these strikes. And they're making a very weaselly argument here, to say the least. And so, as pointed out by Justin Amash, the actual, statements in the War Powers Resolution 1541C are pretty clear. They're pretty explicit. So they say, the constitutional powers of the president as the commander-in-chief to introduce the U.S. into hostilities or into situations where imminent involvement in hostilities is clearly indicated by the circumstances are exercised only pursuant to, number 1, a declaration of war, number 2, specific statutory authorization. Neither of these have happened. That's supposed to be a declaration of war by Congress. Or number 3, a national emergency created by attack upon the United States, its territories, possessions, or its armed forces. They say of the 3 citations, not one indicates a presidential power to take unilateral action without congressional approval for offensive military action. And so that's what this comes down to. I mean, listen, I think the idea of the War Powers Resolution is pretty obvious. It's to rein in the president's authority to conduct these kinds of strikes, to get us into wars, but, unilaterally without authority from Congress. And I think what it's saying here, when it says there's a national emergency, what it means is basically, and there's people who bring up like, well, no, technically Joe Biden can do this strike and then he has 48 hours to go to Congress and notify them. No, that's not how this works. That's for instances where there is like an immediate threat to the American people. There is an immediate, threat of a massive attack against the United States. I mean, they're acting as if like the Houthis are about to bomb New York City or Atlanta, okay? That's not happening. So what are we really talking about here? We're talking about, as Joe Biden said, his justification, this is about international commerce, the flow of international commerce. That does not give you a justification to go and launch these kinds of strikes, right? It's definitionally an offensive action against a country that, again, you don't have to like the Houthis, right? I'm not a big fan of the Houthis, but if you're just talking about a group of people, okay, an organization in Yemen that is trying to create a semi-blockade on a country that is committing a genocide, to try to cause economic pressure on that country and on the global community when the rest of the global community isn't doing anything to stop the genocide, then I think that's perfectly defensible. I mean, obviously we have some actions that are being taken at the ICJ, etc., but imposing economic pressure on a country committing a genocide, to me, is perfectly defensible. What's not defensible is to, arm that genocidal country, to give them the weapons, to give them diplomatic cover, and then to go and strike, to go and conduct a bombing campaign against the group of people trying to stop them. I mean, it's just, this whole situation is absolutely blowing my mind. And it's also, it's absurd for another reason here that was pointed out by Ryan Grimm. The White House calculation that expanding the war in the Middle East by bombing the country right next to the, entrance to the Red Sea, that would entice commercial ships to make journeys through the Red Sea war zone seems not particularly well thought out, about as smart as the escalate in order to de-escalate approach. And he's 100% correct, right? Because the theory here, right, is instead of just doing a ceasefire in Gaza, which is the actual answer, in order to open up the Red Sea, we are now, because all of these ships are terrified to go through the Red Sea and insurance rates in the Red Sea are absolutely skyrocketing, we are now going to start a war at the entrance to the Red Sea, right? And that's somehow going to calm everybody's nerves. That is going to calm down the markets and lower everybody's insurance rates for these shipping vessels by starting a war, by bombing this country that is right on the tip of the entrance to the Red Sea. I mean, it's just the logic, even internally given Joe Biden's justification, doesn't seem to make any sense at face value. We also had here from Hassan Abi on the media angle of this, which has been very consistent throughout their entirety of their coverage of Israel and Gaza. He says, I've been watching CNN since the U.S. coalition started to bomb Yemen, and they haven't mentioned once that the blockade was implemented due to the genocide in Gaza. They have, however, talked about how this bombing campaign is an act of de-escalation, right? Going and bombing a country is an act of de-escalation. What are we doing here? And to not mention the entire reason why the Houthis are doing these attacks on the shipping vessels, right? To not mention that, even if you disagree with them, even if you think they've committed crimes in the process by like taking a hostage or whatever, attacking commercial shipping vessels, if you're actually trying to look at this, you have to understand, even if you hate the Houthis, you disagree with their actions, you support Israel, you still have to understand why they're doing what they're doing. right? In order to have an informed opinion on this, to make informed decisions about this. And our media doesn't even mention it. They don't even mention why any of this is happening, right? Does your average American, given the abysmal media coverage, even know who the Houthis are? Do they know why they've been attacking in the Red Sea? Do they know why we're now going and bombing Yemen? No, they don't, because our media has been an abject failure throughout the entirety of this conflict, and before that, obviously, as well. And so we'll have to see what the, the tangential consequences of this action by Biden is going to be. I mean, this again, it's a very tense situation with Hezbollah, with Iran, obviously now with the Houthis. I would say tense is an understatement, as well as other elements within Iraq and Syria. Like, this is something that very seriously could, in the immediate future, spark off into a broader war. And Joe Biden is willing to do, everything for Israel. He is willing to give them weapons, bypassing Congress to give them weapons in many instances, which is also illegal because we're not legally allowed under the Leahy Act to sell weapons, to give weapons to a country that's using them to commit human rights abuses. So he's bypassing Congress in that sense. He's bypassing Congress to go and strike Yemen. I mean, he's destroying not just his legacy, obviously, is abysmal now, but he's destroying his 2024 chances. He's destroying any remaining legitimacy that the United States had on the world stage by supporting Israel as the United States is doing. And yeah, I mean, we'll have to see where this goes from here, but it's definitely not good.